Welcome to The Point. I'm glad you joined us because we're going quite slowly through Evolution is Impossible, and this is number 13 of quite a long series. I'm not quite sure how many this will be going on for, but quite a lot more, because it's a very, very big subject, and it's a subject about which I feel very strongly, because in the Western world, our children and our young people at universities and schools are taught that everything happened by chance. And this is an atheistic, humanistic belief. It's a belief system, not a science. And I feel very strongly about it. And I think that Christians should have information to show that evolution is impossible. Now, in the last program, we talked about the first law of thermodynamics, a very, very important law of physics, which says that matter and energy cannot create itself. And yet, that's exactly what the evolutionists say happened at the Big Bang 13.75 billion years ago, is that all matter and energy arose from a singularity, which is so small you can't see it. It's smaller than a subatomic particle. I don't know where they get this from. I'll be talking about that later on. But I want to move on now to the second law of thermodynamics. And before defining the second law of thermodynamics, I want to define for you a scientific principle called entropy. And I want to make it simple for you. This is not intended to be a difficult program to follow. It's intended to be simple. What I'm trying to do is to make complicated subjects relatively simple to understand, because I'm a simple person and I like to keep things simple. I hope you approve of that. So let's look at the next picture, which is 157, which is a pile of bricks. So if we can get image number 157 on the screen so we can see what a pile of bricks looks like. Good, that's great. Right, now I want you to imagine that we're traveling along in a lorry at 60 miles an hour and we throw all those bricks out of the back of the lorry. I don't recommend you try this because actually it would be very dangerous if any cars behind you. I just want you to imagine you're driving somewhere safe where there are no other cars and you actually did this. Throw all these bricks out of the back of a lorry traveling at 60 miles an hour. Now, what would you expect? I hope you would expect the next image, which is 158, which is a pile of bricks. I hope you think that's reasonable. That's what I think you would expect. You might expect them to be sort of a bit more jumbled up than that over a mile of road, but nevertheless, you'd expect a pile of bricks. What I hope you would not expect is the next picture, 159, which is a complete, perfectly built wall. So let's see if we can see the next picture, which is a complete, perfectly built wall. You see, what the evolutionists wanting us to believe is that the Big Bang happened, a massive explosion happened, and lots of bits and pieces went flying out, not from the back of a lorry, but an explosion in space, so that everything exploded and then suddenly arrived not at a beautifully, carefully built wall, but in a whole complex solar system, with everything beautifully designed and beautifully rotating, with all sorts of parameters all perfectly in place, with all the gravity fields and all the atmospheric air and all the rest of it, all perfect by chance, first time. Well, I think it's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard of, and more important than what I think, it actually contradicts this law of entropy. Now, as I say, evolutionists want you to believe that the Big Bang happened and everything happened by chance. As you look up at the stars at night, all that was supposed to have happened 13.75 billion years ago by chance out of nothing. Now, let's look at the next picture, which is a fairyland castle. I want to just give you a sort of picture of what I think evolutionists sound like. They wouldn't agree with me, but they say that a fairyland castle happened purely by chance, out of nothing. Well, they're entitled to their opinions about fairyland castles and fairyland solar systems and fairyland galaxies and suns and planets and moons and stars, and even that life evolved by chance. in the primordial slime 13.5 to 13.75 billion years ago. They're entitled to their opinion. All I can say is, to me, it's absolute rubbish. Very strong, but there we are. That's what I think. Now, the second law of thermodynamics says that in any system, disorder increases. I'll just make it very simple. If you've got a drawer full of socks and handkerchiefs, over the months, unless you're very careful like my wife is, if you're a little bit messy like I am, all the socks and all the handkerchiefs and everything else get muddled up, and every now and again you have to clear it all up. Well, that is called entropy. In other words, disorder in the drawer or the disorder in a scientific system or whatever actually increases. Entropy is increasing disorder. Now, in real life, we see entropy all the time. Because if we leave something in the garden and just leave it, eventually we see, image 161, a pile of dust. If you leave a statue in the garden for 300 years, it'll end up as a pile of dust, not as a solar system. I hope that makes sense to you. But that's what we see in real life. You wouldn't expect a fairyland castle from a pile of bricks that exploded. I hope you wouldn't, because I think that's in Never Never Land, in fairyland, and not in the what we've actually seen in real life. Let's move on now. Now, let's move on to this singularity, and let's look at picture number 162. Well done. The evolutionists want you to believe that at the Big Bang, a singularity which is so small it can't be measured became the whole system by chance. By chance. So let's look at 163. That's the solar system. Now, the measurement of disorder, it is a rather unusual way of looking at things, but this measurement of disorder is called entropy, and it is thought of, or can be defined, as the measure of disorder in a system. Now, why I've introduced this all to you rather slowly so that you can understand entropy or increasing disorder is that the second law of thermodynamics, which is a very, very important foundational principle of physics, states that, this is the second law of thermodynamics, states that entropy or disorder of an isolated system can never decrease. So I want to make it simple. In other words, in our universe, a state of a high energy system progresses to a state of a low energy system. I think illustrations and examples are easier than trying to understand what I'm trying to say. So let's look at the sun now in image 164. Now, the sun is a high energy nuclear fusion reactor. Every second, 700,000 tons of hydrogen are converted into helium with the release of massive amount of energy as light and heat. But the sun is actually cooling down. The center of the sun is about 5,000 degrees centigrade, but it actually is cooling down according to our measurements. It's also getting smaller, a little bit smaller every year. So the sun is cooling down. Now, the stars are burning up as well. So let's look at the next one, the next image, 165. So the universe is actually winding down. It's not getting more complex. It's actually getting less complex with less energy. Not more energy, less energy, which is what we would expect. The universe is winding down, and ultimately, if that system, the universe, was allowed to carry on for an incredibly long time, there would actually be what's called heat death in the universe. Because of this second law of thermodynamics, which says that in our universe, everything tends to disorder. So the principle of entropy is exactly what the Bible teaches in the following scriptures. Let's just read the Bible to you now. Hebrews 1, verses 10 to 12. Lord, in the beginning you made the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will disappear into nothingness, but you will remain forever. They will become worn out like old clothes, and someday you will fold them up and replace them. But you yourself will never change, and your years will never end. I'm going to read that again, just the last part of Hebrews chapter 1, verses 10 to 12. The heavens are the work of your hands. They will disappear into nothingness, but you will remain forever. They will become worn out like old clothes, and someday you will fold them up and replace them. But you yourself will never change, and your years will never end. Let's look at Psalm 102, verse 25 to 27. In ages past you laid the foundations of the earth and made the heavens with your hands. They shall perish, but you go on forever. They will grow old like worn-out clothing, and you will change them like a man putting on a new shirt and throwing away the old one. But you yourself never grow old. You are forever, and your years never end. So in the world that we actually see, nothing gets more ordered or higher in energy or design or structure without input from an external higher energy source and a higher intelligence, which in the Bible we call God, and in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, is described as Jesus Christ. Let's again make it simple. I keep trying to make these rather complicated ideas more simple to understand. Let's look at image 166. That's an image of the original Colosseum in Rome, a large structure where they had gladiators and Christians being eaten by lions. I expect you've heard about that. Well, if you visit Rome now, you'll see image 167, and you will see a very decayed Colosseum. It's a tourist landmark, but you can see it had nothing like the amazing structure of the former Colosseum, because time has eroded all the structure of the Colosseum, and entropy has happened. In other words, there's been increasing disorder in the Colosseum. It happens to you and me as well. As we get older, we don't get better. We get worse. I used to run marathons. I can't run marathons anymore because I'm getting older. Right. So in case any evolutionists are watching this program, they claim that adding energy will actually increase the order of that system, because this is one of the things they're very aware of the second law of thermodynamics. And they say, well, that's not fair, because at the Big Bang, energy was added to the system, and that's where all this energy came from. Again, this is not doesn't actually coincide with what we actually see. Let's look again at image 168. That's the atomic bomb in 1945. Now, in 1945, America added a lot of energy. That's the American Air Force, added a lot of energy in the form of nuclear bombs to two cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but they didn't increase the order in either city. In fact, in image 169, they flattened Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Let's look at image 169. So that's what the nuclear bomb did. But that was 1945, and sadly thousands and thousands of people were killed. But since 1945, I showed you this earlier in the last program, in image 170, there's been a lot of work in Hiroshima, and that is what Hiroshima looks like today. It didn't happen by chance. It happened because a lot of people have put a lot of work and a lot of energy and a lot of time and money into building a modern Hiroshima. Now, the sun's energy, the energy from the sun, remember I told you that the sun is a nuclear fusion reactor producing masses and masses of energy in the form of light and heat. Now that light and heat is actually destructive to our tissues, were it not for the so-called greenhouse gases in the upper stratosphere. There's only one molecule on planet Earth that can properly harness with efficiency all the energy from the sun, and it is all plants. This molecule is in all plants. It's called chlorophyll. I expect you've heard of chlorophyll. Now, chlorophyll, in a process called photosynthesis, converts water and carbon dioxide into oxygen and sugar with 100% efficiency. And that is the only molecule that can do it. We do have photoelectric cells in our solar panels on the top of our buildings, some of them, particularly in Spain or hot places like that. But they're only 15% efficient. They're very inefficient compared with plants. But what I'm saying is that the sun's energy is actually destructive. For example, if you have a roof made out of roofing felt, you'll find that after a year or two, it's slowly becoming destroyed by the energy from the sun. So eventually the sun will burn the roofs of our houses and turn the bricks of the houses into powder, which actually is exactly what the second law of thermodynamics says. It says that because of entropy, increasing disorder, what we see is systems winding down from high energy systems to low energy systems. Again, let me give you a simple example. Look at image 171. That's a hot cup of coffee. If you have a hot cup of coffee in front of you and stand and watch it, after about 20 minutes, you'll guess what? You're not going to have a hotter cup of coffee, you're going to have a colder cup of coffee. Because it's cooled down. The energy in the cup of coffee has dissipated in the form of heat through the china of the cup and heated up the surrounding atmosphere, but the actual coffee itself is now colder because of entropy. Energy is being released into the surrounding atmosphere around the coffee cup, and it is just as well that coffee doesn't get hotter. It gets colder because otherwise, of course, we might burn ourselves when we visit Starbucks or someplace like that. Right. So in the same way, the Big Bang couldn't cause a high-energy universe. It could only cause a decaying universe, and that's what we actually see. When we look up at the stars, the sun, which is actually cooling down and getting smaller, and the whole universe, which is slowly winding down to ultimate heat death, we observe not a system which is getting higher in energy, but lower in energy. Let's look now at image 172. That's an ordered universe, which is what God created. The order and energy observed in the universe implies an outside energy because order cannot create itself. The universe is actually highly, highly complex. There are a whole lot of parameters involved in the universe. The sun is rotating, the planets rotate around the sun. There are moons rotating around the individual planets. There's a massive amount of magnetic attraction between the various large solar bodies like the sun and the moon and the stars and the planets. And on each individual planet, like ours, for example, Earth, we have a magnetic field, we have the right temperature, we have the right gravitational field, we have the right consistency of oxygen and carbon dioxide and nitrogen in the air, all consistent with life. We have the right temperature, we have the right acidity, the pH. Everything is very carefully controlled because this didn't happen by chance. This was something that was highly, highly ordered system created by an incredible designer called God. Now, the God of the Bible, of course, is the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So I come back to image 173. Jesus Christ is God. And it says in the beginning of John, chapter 1, first 4 verses, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men." So who actually created everything? Answer, Jesus Christ. And who created life? Answer, Jesus Christ. So basically what we have here is an atheistic belief system that not only did all energy and matter evolve by chance, out of nothing, but life itself evolved by chance, out of nothing. In fact, they have made a God out of something called chance. We're now going to look at Charles Darwin. Let's look at the next picture. This is image 174. If you go to the Natural History Museum, you'll see a large statue of Charles Darwin. Now, he wrote a book. Let's look at the next picture, The Origin of Species. That's the next picture. Well done. So he wrote this Origin of Species in 1859. He wouldn't be able to get away with it now because he stated things in this book which are totally unscientific and provably unscientific. Given the resources he had in 1859, he produced an atheistic, humanistic book which discredited the scripture and actually has been a big problem for Christianity in the Western world. Because up until 1859, Christians believed that the Bible was the truth and that God created the heavens and the earth. Then this scientist called Charles Darwin came and said, well, he traveled to the Galapagos Islands a long way away, and he discovered the origins of how the different species were formed. What he actually did was actually travel to a group of islands off the west coast of South America called the Galapagos Islands, and he initially studied finches, birds, simple birds called finches. And let's look at the next picture, 176. Now, what he actually studied in depth was the length and breadth of 14 different types of finches in the Galapagos Islands. And he noted that these different finches had different length and breadth of beaks. You might actually say, well, so what? He didn't actually gone to the Galapagos Islands to observe that. He could probably observe that in a wood not far from where you live. Well, the answer is he could have done. But things sound better if you go to the Galapagos Islands. Remember, in 1859, most people didn't travel more than 10 miles away from their own home. So to go to the Galapagos Islands and come back is a bit like, in those days, going to Mars and coming back. So these variations in the bird's beak were so minor that later visitors to the islands had trouble identifying the variations. He saw different lengths and breadths of beaks of the various finches, but what he actually observed was not evolution at all. It was variation within a kind, what we call microevolution. He needn't have bothered to go to the Galapagos Islands to observe variation of species. You see, what's happening here is, let's look at the next picture, 178. If we can get image 178 on the screen. On the left here, we've got so-called evolution, where life forms at the bottom there, amoeba, develop into fish and mammals and birds and eventually dogs and humans. That is their theory. I'll talk in the next program about how that theory came about. Of course, creation is very different. If we could just have a look at that last picture once again. What we see with creation is variation within one species. For example, there are different types at the bottom there of different types of humans and different types of dogs and different types of fish and different types of everything else. This is microevolution or variation within a kind. So this is completely different. This evolution concept is quite different from what we actually observe. Let's look at this next picture, 179. According to evolution, a primitive life form, like on the top left there, some sort of frog, evolves into a monkey, which evolves into a man. That's what evolution wants us to believe, and that is called macroevolution, or changing of one species into another. And all I can say is you have never, ever seen macroevolution, and you never will. You will never see macroevolution because, in my opinion, it doesn't exist. So macroevolution is defined as the mutation of one species to another and has never actually been observed and never can be observed in a laboratory. So it is a belief system, not science. Creation is a belief system. And evolution is a belief system. We can't go back. We can't go back to the origins of life and the origins of the universe when God created the universe and formed Adam and Eve. We can't do that. If you're enjoying these programs, do write to us at info@revelationtv. I'd love to hear from you. And my website is freechristianteaching.org. Bless you, thank you, and join us again soon. Take care now.